key issue 3 deals with energy, and the chapter starts off dealing with the supply side of energy. And as we see there, the 3 main fossil fuels are coal, petroleum, and natural gas. And when we look at the graphs, we can see that in terms of coal production, China and the United States would be the big players. If we look at petroleum, we see that Russia and Saudi Arabia are the big players, with the United States coming in third. And if we look at natural gas, we can see the United States and Russia are big players there also. When we look at the trends, we can see, thankfully, that wood stopped being a source sometime around the turn of the century, 1900s. We see that coal has stabilized. We see that natural gas has increased, and we see that petroleum has increased, and nuclear power and hydro don't seem to have changed too much in the past few years. On the demand side of the equation, you cannot have development without having energy. The two go hand in hand. So in terms of industry, they use 40% of their needs come from natural gas. In terms of transportation, almost 100% comes from petroleum. And in terms of our homes, natural gas is a main player there. When we look at around the world, countries around the world, who's demanding what, we see that Europe is a big player, United States is a big player, and look at China. China's got 20% compared to the United States, and I want to point something out with the next graph, the next map. So look at this. It says that energy consumption for us and Russia is high. We can't, in Western Europe, we can't live without it. But look at China. China's coming in at a per capita basis that's lower. You know, we go back to this thing here and we say, wow, well, China's taking more energy than the United States, and then we look at the per capita and we say, well, it's come down. The reason for that is because China has such a large population, like 1.1, 1.2 billion people, so that denominator makes the per unit number come down. When we look at the developing country, they want what we want, and why wouldn't they? So we're still on the demand side of the equation, and you can see that in the next 30 years there's going to be a tremendous demand from the less developed world to get the energy. So the question arises, are we going to run out of this stuff? And the answer is probably not, but should we be careful? That depends on a political, I think, a political as well as technological orientation. Everybody will have different opinions about that. All of these numbers are based on the idea of proven reserves, and the idea of a proven reserve is that with a given technology, this is how many years that we have left. But we know that technology advances every year. So as the technology advances, our ability to get these resources makes the proven reserves bigger, and a good example of that would be fracking. We didn't even have that technology a decade ago, and now it's making us a major supplier. So when we look at coal over here, the United States is a big player, so is Russia and Australia, and there's 130 years of coal remaining. Unfortunately, the Chinese are building coal plants almost like one a week. That's an exaggeration, but they're building them real fast, and so what that's going to do is going to be problems with air pollution for them, and also for us with the world. In terms of natural gas, we've got 56 years of proven reserves. You can see there on the pie chart, Iran and Russia and Qatar are big players. In terms of petroleum, you would know the obvious players: Saudi Arabia, Venezuela is a big one, Canada. In terms of nuclear power, France would be the country that has the most proportion of nuclear power generation, and as you see there, Ukraine, Sweden, and Belgium would be some others. In terms of hydroelectric generation of electricity, as we see there, it's the second most popular source, and 2/3 of this world hydropower comes from the poor countries of the world. The wind power, I was kind of happy with myself with coming up with the West is best. But as you see there in the map, you can see that you get more wind energy in the West than you would in the East. In this graph, we see a very good correlation between climate change and CO2. You know, all the scientists say that humans are increasing the CO2, and that acts as a kind of like a blanket on Earth, and so our temperature goes up. and it will cause melting ice and rising seawaters, and Norfolk is one of the most vulnerable places on the East Coast, and so we'll be hearing more about that. In terms of this map right here, what you see is that a lot of acid rain is generated in the coal-fired plants in the Midwest, but because the winds blow from west to east, it blows over toward New York and New England. And so an economist would call that an externality, and an externality is where someone is able to push off a cost onto a third party. And a good example of that is the atmosphere. And so, the coal plants just say, well, it's a free place to deposit these emissions. And so there's a tendency to want to do that because it doesn't cost them anything. They perceive it as free. And because they don't bear the cost of that decision, it makes it an even easier decision for them. An allied association with this is something called the tragedy of the commons. You ought to look it up on Google. It's fascinating, and what it says is that if there's a common property like the Chesapeake Bay or like the atmosphere, human nature is to overuse that property and to degrade it. And so what the author of the phrase said is that we need mutual coercion, mutually agreed upon, what a law is. And so he was saying that we need a law to restrict these emissions. And then the last graph here, look at this. This is water withdrawal, and my goodness, look at North America compared to the rest of the countries there. And so when we're talking about development, like in the last chapter, chapter 10, two things you have to have if you're going to develop. You got to have energy, and then you got to have water, because so much of industry is based on water. So again, this whole section is dealing with energy, and we're dealing with energy and industry in chapter 11, and these are some good maps here. Thanks. Bye.